Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Logocentric. It is our 20th episode. It's crazy to think that we put out this many episodes so far. And today we are going to be talking about the uncertain times of the 2020 election. So it has been a very intense couple of weeks. So for those of you who are not from America, the United States just had their presidential election at the beginning of November, and we still don't really know what's going on. I mean, if we look at the press and what's the projected outcome, then Joe Biden appears to have won, and we're looking at a Biden-Harris 4-year term. But Trump has sent in lawyers. There's been evidence of voter fraud. And yes, there has actually been evidence of voter fraud. Now, what's been interesting about this, and we're going to go a little bit more in depth with this later, is how narratives have been switching around almost completely, where things that hardcore MAGA people would be saying in 2016, now the hardcore SJWs are saying in 2020. And it's just a little strange because you figure that, like, it's sort of the Jordan Peterson quote of, you don't want to play the game of your enemies because then you don't win. You just win at their game. So you just become the most successful exponent of their pathology, right? So that's kind of what we're seeing a little bit now from the right and the left. And let's go a little bit from the beginning. Let's start from there. So we had a general election. It appeared that Trump and Biden were pretty neck and neck. Then it came down to the swing states. And when it came down to the swing states, stuff started getting weird. All right, we saw 100,000 votes overnight, 100% go to Biden. And listen, whether you voted for Biden or Trump, you have to admit statistically that is highly improbable that an entire 100,000 would be for one candidate. If it was 100,000 votes for Trump and then 0 for Biden, I would be equally as suspicious because statistically that's just improbable. Now, one argument people have been throwing out is that, well, Trump told his voters not to vote via mail-in, and Biden said, hey, do vote via mail-in, and so those mail-in votes are just being counted, and there weren't any for the Republicans. Now, there may be something to this argument, if we're being honest, because Republicans have a tendency, let's say, to do single party straight ballots. Now, and what I'm bringing that up for is because people were saying that there were lots of ballots for Biden with no other candidates filled in, no other state or local government people voted for, just Biden, right? And so you think that's a little bit strange. There's tons and hundreds of thousands of ballots that are just for Biden, but not for anybody else, right? They're not voting for anybody else in their local government, Supreme Court, elections. They're not really voting for anybody. They're just like Biden and that's it, right? As to where you don't have that with Trump, really. It's like 3%, right? And the majority of Trump's voters voted for him and then somebody else in their state and general election, right? Or not general election, but their state and local election. So it seems a bit odd that you'd have all these ballots just for Biden with no other votes attached to it. But I think what you might be able to explain that was with the straight party voting that the Republican Party tends to do. Now, I live in Oklahoma, a very red state, and I have heard from tons of people, very older people, granted, but they always say things like, if you don't know who to vote for, just vote straight Republican. That's what I'm doing. I'm voting straight Republican. And I'm like, you're not going to look at all the candidates. You're just going to assume that because they're Republican, they're a good choice, right? But apparently there's a lot of people in the Republican Party that just do straight party voting, right? Now that may play a factor. That may be why you only see 3% of Trump's votes with just Trump and no other people elected or voted for, excuse me. And with Biden, it's so high, it's like 100% in some places because maybe they don't have the propensity for straight party voting. I don't know. I don't have any facts to back up that the Democratic Party doesn't like to vote, just via straight party. Me personally, I like to vote primarily it changes, right? In the 2016 election, I was a little bit more left-leaning because I was in college. So I voted primarily libertarian and left. And in this election, I voted a little bit more libertarian and right. So it just kind of depends on who's in office and who's running and things like that. And, where everyone's at in their state of mind, which brings me up to one of my points. We need to recognize that the division that is being shown right now, that's being demonstrated, is not solely at the feet of the election and the people who and it's not solely at the feet of the president-elects, right? It's actually at our feet. I don't think most people are giving this proper credit. So I'll hear things like, Bush is the most divisive president we've ever had. And then I'll see, Obama was the most divisive president we've ever seen. And now I've seen Trump is the most divisive president we've ever seen. And now Biden's... It's just, I don't think that's who's at fault here. I don't think that's the person to blame. I think the people to blame is us. We're the ones that are driving the polarization. We're the ones that are saying, if you vote for the other side, you're X or you're Y, right? So nowadays it'd be like, if you're voting Republican, you're just a racist or a fascist. And if you're voting for the left, then you're just an ideologue, and then you're just completely, disconnected from reality and blah, 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 blah. Like everyone's saying things like that, you SJW, blah, blah, blah. But really the fundamental argument is you're just stuck in la la land and you have no connection to reality. And then the other side of the argument is basically saying, well, you guys are just ignoring people's feelings and becoming fascist and racist because you're ignoring people's feelings, which is like, what? But that's what's going on. Everyone's kind of projecting this weird caricatured version of each other onto each other. It's weird. It's just strange that, for instance, no one can understand why somebody would vote opposite them. That's a problem. Like, I understand why some people would vote for Biden. I understand why people would vote for Trump. I understand why people would vote for neither and just vote for libertarian or just not vote at all. Like, I understand that. I really do. And I think more people should come to understand that because it shows where the other person's values are, right? Not who they are as people, but what do they value most, right? And so you could think of things like the right values freedom and the left values equality, right? And so those things have their place. In the right place at the right time, they're great things, right? But if you try to gerrymander equality via things like equity, you're going down a bad path, right? And if you're trying to liberate everybody and make them free by putting them under some super tyrannical, rigid order, like something like a hardcore conservative, kind of party would be like, then that's the wrong way to go too. We don't want like no government anarchism and things like that. Now, I'm seeing that also on both sides. That's a whole other episode we could get into, which is like the anarchy movement and its deviations into like libertarian anarchists, like anarcho-capitalists, and then the anarcho-syndicate socialists. Like, there's so many different things. We should, just save that for a whole other video. But getting back to it, we all have these caricatured versions of the other side in our head, and we need to sort of blow those things up by actually trying to understand why the other side thinks the way it does. All right, and so we've talked a little bit about how people have become divisive. I think the narrative switching and the blame shifting needs to stop. It's like, for instance, in 2016, Donald Trump became president and the left hated it. And as a response, the cynical, snarky right would say things like, well, he's still your president, whether you like it or not. And now that Biden is projected to win, and Trump is saying that there's alleged fraud, which there has been whistleblowers in Wisconsin and Michigan from the USPS that have been coming out and saying, hey, people have been backdating ballots that shouldn't be counted because they were late and they missed the deadline, but they were backdating hundreds of thousands of votes. This is a problem. This is a problem. And so we don't really know the outcome yet. But we've been switching the narrative. So now you hear people on the left saying, well, remember that whole still your president bit? Isn't that great now? And now they're using those things against them. It's like you have one side of the party that is saying that allegedly we're trying to bring unity. This is what the left is claiming. We're trying to bring unity to the country and heal the soul of America. But in that exact same party, you're having people who are just absolutely dogging on anybody who voted for Trump, who would possibly vote for Trump. They're trying to keep lists of people. There's a Twitter account called the Trump Accountability Project where they're trying to keep lists of people that egged on Trump so they could like hold them accountable. What does that even mean? That sounds like Leninist, communist, like this bullshit. What are we doing? That's like McCarthyism. What are we devolving into when we do these type of things? So the left has that problem. Now, the right also has the problem of not being able to look at Trump objectively. I've noticed this a lot. There's a lot of people on the right who refuse to see the faults in Trump, right? They'll see all the positive things about him, which it's like if you're a sane person, you can see the positive benefits that Trump's presidency has brought, and you can see the negative aspects of his character, right? Those are like really the two yin and yangs of the Trump presidency, is his policies, which have been pretty good for the most part, and then his behavior, which has been absolutely terrible, right? And so you have the right completely ignoring one side of those things. And so there has been times throughout this where Trump just needs to shut up. He needs to just let the legal system do its job, do its thing. Checks and balances, baby. That's what we've got going on, and he just needs to shut up and let it take place. Now, if there's some bullshit, shady stuff that starts to happen, yeah, speak out. But he's basically saying things like, they stole this election, I won this election, and that's just irresponsible right now, even if it might be true. Because again, it could come out later and the courts flip it and they decide there was actually pretty big fraud going on and it's going to Trump, right? We could still be there. We don't know yet, okay? But the right refuses to acknowledge the negative side of Trump's behavior, which it needs to be recognized. It's childish. And, it makes you think, I don't know if maybe you should be in office, because is your response to maybe, what if you do lose? What if you legitly lose, Trump? What are you going to do? Are you going to say, okay, well, the lawyers came back, they didn't find anything, I guess we're done. Maybe we'll get him in, another 4 years. Or are you going to egg it on and say, no, they stole this from us? What's going to happen there? And there's a lot of Trump supporters who are animated enough by that narrative that they actually feel the election is being stole from them. Now, here's the thing. We don't know that they're wrong. Now, we don't know that they're right, so we shouldn't be jumping to conclusions. But we don't know they're wrong. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is we need to acknowledge the possible outcomes of this election when it's decided finally by the court, because, just to reiterate, the media does not call an election. They project a winner via the numbers that they're received or that they count. Now, again, they're the media. I don't really trust them one damn bit, and why should I? They've given me no reason to believe that they're trustworthy. But once the court decides this is a winner, we need to accept it. Now, what are the two possible outcomes? Maybe they're both wrong and Kanye becomes president. No, I'm just kidding. No, but what could happen is the courts could overturn this election, and it could go to Trump because there's evidence of voter fraud and there's ample evidence of it. And it's not just in a couple places. It's in places like Georgia, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida, and that's a couple of those he even won, but there's still evidence of fraud there, and we need to investigate it, and it could overturn the election. We need to accept that that's a possible outcome. Now, what is going to happen if that does occur? I think likely you'll see a repeat of 2016, but it's going to be a lot more animated, because in 2016 there were riots. There were riots, and people felt they were justified. Now, riots have been even more intense recently because of the whole George Floyd situation, and they have an even greater sense of indignation, like this is deserved. And if they basically, here's another thing too, narratives have been propped up so that it's like Kamala Harris is the first black female VP, blah, 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 blah. If they build up this narrative that like Kamala has achieved these accolades and then it's taken from her, there's going to be this deep ideological resentment that builds up on the left. Like, the right is saying, you stole our election. The left is like, you stole our civil rights. You stole our goal. Because if you think about it, kids my age, and well, I guess they're adults now, but adults my age and a little bit younger to the young adults, they've been wanting to be a part of some great civil rights movement because they weren't there for Rosa Parks, they weren't there for MLK and Malcolm X, and they weren't there for those things. And so they want to feel like they're a part of some great change that contributed to the bettering of humanity. And so if they feel like Kamala Harris is their victory and it's taken from them, they're going to lose their shit. Period. They're going to lose their minds. And from that ideological perspective, you could see why that would just flip them, that would just turn them off, right? Like they would, whew, right? You're going to be pissed because you took my civil rights. This was what my generation was supposed to stand for, and you took that. Oh, there's going to be terrible riots. If we thought the George Floyd riots were bad, I'm sure something caused from that would be much worse. But what's the other side of that? The other side is that they genuinely conclude Biden won the election. And Trump supporters, especially the more conspiratorial, hardcore, ideological fan base of Trump, could mobilize. And now, here's the thing. If the left starts to mobilize and riot, private businesses and residents need to be concerned. If the right mobilizes, state capitals need to be concerned. I think that's the difference between the two riots, right? The left is going to riot in the businesses in the metro and in the residential area, and the right is just going to go to the Capitol buildings and the government buildings and raise hell. So I think those are two outcomes that need to be absolutely seriously considered. And if one happens, what are you going to do? Now, here's something I should point out. Those are just possibilities. Trump could win this election. Everyone could have like a sort of hissy fit moment, but the courts showed definitively of fraud, and there's nothing really that can be said. But, you know, I think the left that possibility is going to take a longer road to recovery because we'll still have another 4 years of Trump. And I think what's going to happen is the media will still use those 4 years, if he wins, to say how he stole the election and how he used lawyers to win an election, and the popular vote wasn't anywhere near in his favor, and he used a bunch of lawyers to come in and steal the election. I bet it'll be 4 years of that. But here's going to be the beauty of it. If Trump wins, and he has his 4-year term, that's his last 4 years. Then what are you going to do? CNN, MSNBC, Fox, everyone, what are you going to do now when the Trump train, aka the cash cow, is gone? How are you going to get your ratings up then? Good luck. And we will see who is swimming without any trunks when the tide comes in, right? We'll see if the emperor really has any clothes on, if you know what I'm saying. So I think it's actually a great thing if Trump becomes president, because that means for sure we've only got 4 more years, and then we're literally done for good. Because it's against the law for him to run for a 3rd term. Constitutionally, there's an amendment. I believe it's the 24th. I could be wrong about that. But it was enacted during FDR's presidency because he was voted 4 times. So, 4 more years of Trump, he's out. He's gone. We're done with Trump. He's going back to his millionaire life, and he's doing his thing. Or billionaires. Maybe he's a billionaire. I haven't checked. I don't really know Trump's net worth or whatever. But let's take a look at the other side. Let's say Biden wins. And let's say Trump supporters don't freak out and riot. Let's say they actually kind of say, all right, it's proof. Nothing really happened. We just lost. I bet you'll have, 4 years of how Trump stole the election. Or I'm sorry, how Biden stole the election. And how evil the left is and blah, blah, blah. I'm sure that stuff will be out there for sure. I think the danger in Biden winning is that there's still a possibility that Trump could run again. And I think that's going to give his following a bigger snowball to wind up. Because right now, Trump is sort of restricted by the bounds of being president. There's only so much you can do as president, and there's a lot of stuff you can't do, right? Especially if you're in the public eye and stuff. But once you're not president anymore, you're still looked at because you were a president. We're still looking at you. It's not like you're off the hook and you can go, snort coke and do a bunch of hookers in front of everybody. Like, that's not gonna fly, bro. You can't do that, okay? But what could happen is Trump could say, okay, I'm not president anymore. Now I can really ramp up my fan base. Now I can really start to, get them on my side. So when 2024 comes, we just have an absolute Trump train that even moderate Trump supporters don't want. That could happen, right? And so we just got to be honestly really cognizant of what could happen in accepting those outcomes, right? Now, I'm going to end on this. Regardless of what any of those outcomes happen to be, the president does not determine the quality of your life. You do, right? They do not have the power to legislate a good life for you. This is why equity is such a problem, because you cannot gerrymander people's interests based on skin color or income and try to make everyone have an equal outcome in life. You just can't, because everybody is responsible to a degree for their own position in life. Now, sometimes, the rug is pulled out from underneath you. Sometimes you find out your wife is cheating on you. Sometimes you find out, you're getting laid off. Sometimes things do get pulled out from underneath you. But what you do in response to that, regardless of whether you want to say that particular thing was your fault, how you respond to it is your fault and your responsibility. So how are you going to respond if Biden is in fact president, or if Trump overturns the projected decision? How are you going to react? How are you going to respond? Right? I think these are things that are worth thinking about, because, like I said, regardless of who's in office, you are going to have to make decisions to better your life. If your life was miserable for the past 4 years and you don't do anything different today to change that, you're going to be miserable in 4 more years. It doesn't matter if Biden's in office or not. Yeah, your orange man syndrome bad, that whole, that may go away, but all the other problems that you pushed away to act like that was your biggest problem will just come back. And if anything, they're bigger now because you've been ignoring them. So, on top of all this, please stop putting so much of who you are and who we are into who our president is. Because at the end of the day, the president does not define us or our lives. We do. We decide who America is. We decide what America is, not the president. Yeah, the president has some legislative power, but like I said earlier, we have checks and balances. There's only so much a president can do legally. So I'll just end on that. And if you want your life to get better because the past 4 years have been terrible for you, well, you better start making different decisions. In fact, I got a video called Motivation Myths. So if you are in a position where you do not feel motivated, watch that video, get those myths debunked, and get productive, move on with your life, and stop worrying so much about who's in office and start worrying about the things that you can control, right? We can always cast our vote to who gets in office, but once they are elected, there's nothing we can do about it. They're elected, they won. What are you going to do to make your life better? All right, that's all I've got for you today. If you enjoyed this episode, hit the like button and the subscribe button. Also hit the notification bell to get notified when content just... Also, go in the description and check out the links to our Locals and ThinkSpot community, where we're having great conversations over there. We talk about things like free will and determinism and all kinds of different stuff over there. So go check it out, become a member, and I'll see you guys over there. I'm Logocentric. Thank you for watching.